Thank you. I would like to wish everyone a warm welcome to this EON Reality Energy segment webinar. And I am Mats Johansson. I'm president and co-founder of EON Reality. And I started my career in part within the energy sector, working in the North Sea on oil and gas installation as an engineer. And so this area has always been near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to sharing with you a little bit our experience over the past 17 years in this segment. We, in energy and oil and gas, we work with three main activities. One, of course, is exploration, which can be visualizing survey results or training using technical equipment, and we'll see some examples of both. The picture here depicts in one of our iCube systems a cross-section from a drilling sample, basically. Planning is the other one. Work with reviews, validation, safety, all early in the design process. And of course, by immersing yourself, you get very close to the real world. And the most important, where we have today the most activity, is in the production area, whether it's optimization, review processes, minimize the non-productive time, or training, providing experiential training in virtual reality, and more as we look forward, provide on-demand knowledge right there and then in the field. So that's something we'll talk about using AR. And last but not least, safety. We always embed safety training in all of our applications. And I must say it's a very exciting time. I've been doing VR and AR for a little bit over 20 years. And at this point, we have so many low-cost devices. We have good networks. We have other technologies that are pushing along the use of VR and AR. So I can't think of a more exciting time to get in and start to take advantage of this in training your staff and providing safety, better planning, better exploration. A lot of people ask us, why do we do this? EON is fully focused on using VR and AR for knowledge transfer. And here I have listed a number of studies that show the value. And depending on which study you look at, you can draw different conclusions. But we've seen things like 35% improvement in test scores. We've seen 80% better retention using VR and simulations versus normal training delivery. In many cases, you can't even train in other ways. So there's a different layer of benefits. But faster learning is ultimately what we're looking at, a better way to learn and get information. Let me talk a little bit. I'll be very brief here, but just about EON Reality. As I mentioned, we've been around since 1999. And we are, and I can say this wholeheartedly, a global leader in AR and VR-based knowledge transfer. We like the terminology knowledge transfer because we work both in vocational education as well as with industry in a few segments, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also have built up this network, and I'll show a little bit more about this around the world, where we have offices on one hand, but we also have IDCs, interactive digital centers. There are content factories, support hubs, and innovation hubs as well. And that has really allowed us to scale and deliver to many of our large clients in a whole different way. And that historically was one of the biggest challenges, and we've really overcome that. Over these 17 years, we've done many applications in energy, oil and gas, and other segments. I'll only have time to cover a few here, but if you are interested in more specific information, specific examples, don't hesitate to reach out to our marketing department, and we'll be glad to connect and do a one-on-one and share much more in depth what we are doing. Let's talk a little bit big picture before we get into some specific examples and technology. As a company, we're a very mission-driven organization, and we've set out this vision for what we call EON Human 2.0, where we see a revolution in terms of how humans interact with technology, bridging the gap between man and machine. This has many layers, and we'll come back and talk about this. Ultimately, what we are interested in is to look at workers. There's about 2.5 billion workers today in the world that over the next 20, 30 years risk to be replaced by artificial intelligence and automation. There is, in addition to that, today, about 1.3 billion students that need continuous education. It's not the fact, like it used to be 30 years ago, when our parents or grandfathers, you got an education, you worked your whole life, you got the gold watch, and rode happily into the sunset. That's not going to exist anymore. It's a shifting landscape. Future workers need this continuous education. There's pressure on time and less money. So looking at this at a global picture, there's a huge amount of the human population that is at risk being displaced. The EON Reality Human 2.0 vision is to, through our means, contribute to improving this picture using our AVR platform, Global IDC Network, try to build this bridge that closes the gap between man and machine. And I'll come into a little bit more what these different things are: IDCs, Virtual Trainer, AR Assist, and Creator AVR. So let's talk a little bit more on the strategy side. So we just went through Human 2.0. AVR, that's our platform. First and foremost, EON is a software company, and we built up this platform that includes both AR and VR. Makes it easy to create content, makes it easy to do remote training, makes it easy to do what we refer to as AR Assist, or inject knowledge into an application as we start to see these wonderful AR devices being more prevalent in the market. The IDCs, as I mentioned, we use to really scale this effort. And by the way, IDCs is a very close partnership to EON. We co-own or own most of these IDCs. So it's a very, very close relationship. And of course, the goal is to proliferate adoption of hardware agnostic VR software. And of course, the focus is primarily on vocational education and enterprise. And in enterprise, we've also decided to focus on the segments where we feel we have the best expertise. And we're going to talk, of course, specifically about energy today, but we're also doing a lot of work in aerospace, a lot of work in medical, that's both pharmaceutical and device, manufacturing more broadly, including automotive. And we also have a security division that works with helping to train municipalities, police, EMTs, etc. in security. So with that, let's move on. So I've talked a little bit about this. We have this big disruption. Traditional learning has a hard time to keep up. There's at the same time a growing gap between skilled workers and jobs. And in the US alone, looking at the last numbers, there are about 3.5 million manufacturing jobs available. Over the next decade, it's expected 2 million or so will go unfilled because of a lack of skills to address that. So how do we at EON specifically work to fill this gap? We don't want to do the negative scenario where we all are immersed in a virtual world, and instead of doing productive work, meaningful work, which provides a lot more than income, it provides identity, dignity, and so forth. We want to make work towards a positive scenario with AVR empowered humans. And a little bit of this might seem science fiction-like, but when you look at where AR devices are, artificial intelligence, IoT, cloud computing, we see this connection between these different technologies and AR, VR really starting to accelerate over the next 3 to 10 years. So it's really important to get on the wagon here, not to miss the opportunity. So let's switch gears a little bit after that introduction and talk about energy market specifically. So now we'll get much more focused. I just wanted to give you a little bit broader picture first. So there are some common problems that we see from our clients in the energy sector and to some extent outside that. Cost is one. There's a need to minimize time and resource spent on training. And of course, maintaining quality is extremely important, especially in the energy sector. There's a high degree of complexity. Employees need to be much more proficient. Change happens more rapidly. What you know today will not cut it a year from now or maybe even 6 months. Risk, you have to be able to train for a wide variety of hazardous situations. There's a problem with quality. Traditional classroom training, for instance, doesn't give the hands-on experience. That's really important for a lot of the technicians, electricians, maintenance people that we train. It's also difficult to assess someone's knowledge, and we simply can't have someone, walk next to a trained employee and be ready to jump in if something goes wrong. We have to really certify and be able to assess. And of course, with VR AR, that becomes a lot easier. So here's our energy AVR solution. And in our view, some of the key benefits, you can join safety and productivity hand in hand. I'll show you some examples of this. You can add a lot of value bottom line. You can shorten the training time to achieve mastery, which is a huge problem with the aging workforce. And I know we can take 15 years to achieve mastery, which maybe you could do 10, 20, 30 years ago. It has to happen a lot quicker today. State-of-the-art training, especially if you look at the millennial generation, which is really coming into the job market in a big way. They have different expectations for how to learn. Evolution of delivery methods. This is from a study that was done for one of our clients in the mining sector, but it's interesting because it applies much more broadly. So looking at different delivers, there's classroom training traditionally, there's e-learning traditionally, there's simulator-based learning, which has been around for a long time, certainly in pilot training and so forth, but also in other areas. So we're starting to see 1, 2, and 3 being augmented by virtual classroom, more 3D-based e-learning or apps, simulators being augmented with things like HTC Vive or iCubes, Caves, that can present a wide variety of simulation scenarios, much more flexible than a typical, let's say, a drilling simulator, for instance. I can do one thing really well. And then we have this fourth layer, which starts to make the picture really, really interesting, which is augmented reality. And of course, with augmented reality, and especially wearables starting to mature, we're still a little bit early in this market. I'm thinking about things like Microsoft HoloLens, Osterhout Group, ODG, Meta, Epson. There are a number of them out there. As they start to mature, we will be able to use this much more efficiently with technicians working in the field. It's difficult many times to work with a tablet because you need to work with both of your hands to do the procedures. And we're getting closer and closer to that inflection point. And the interesting thing with that specifically is that you can deliver on-demand training right then and there in the field. And of course, then you remove potentially a lot of cost, a lot of barriers, and so forth. So that one, and we really saw, from E.ON's side, we saw an enormous uptick in interest for big companies to really get involved into AR and invest time and money to be ready for this wave that's coming during the last 12 months, and it keeps intensifying. This snapshot of a study will really show the potential here. So I'll start on the right with operator training. So this is basically replacing simulator training using a drilling rig simulator with the flexible systems like a Vive or an IQ with classical training. And there's no doubt that you can have an enormous amount of savings. One, you don't need the real drilling rig. At some point you do, but you don't need it early in the training, for instance. So huge potential. On the left, we have a different one. This is a shank adapter change. And this scenario is using AR training in the field versus the classical training delivery with travel, with training centers, with equipment needing to be there. And of course, there you have just an enormous potential. I would say this is a paradigm shift. Maybe you can't get 92% cost savings in every case, but I think it can have an enormous impact on many industries, really, really changing. And that's why, in our view, AR is so important to start to get ready for. A little bit about our principles. So as I've mentioned, we work with VR-based, simulation-based learning. Benefits learn faster, remember longer, make better decisions. On the other end, we work on AR-based knowledge injection, contextual real-time geolocation-based knowledge, customized for the user's needs. And this is when I talked about with the shank adapter change here, for instance. And of course, we provide a lot of services around this and help our clients develop specific applications, sometimes with our own subject matter experts, which we have quite a few within the energy sector. But if it's specific, also with the clients' SMEs. Some of the benefits you can see from using the AVR solution: faster learning, contextual knowledge injection, really improving safety. You can do any type of scenario in a completely safe, repetitive environment, which is wonderful. We also see greater engagement from almost all types of employees. And we see, a different way to do assessment. I'll come to a little bit of integration, but we integrate with learning management systems. You can track, a lot of variables in a simulation environment, which is, wonderful in terms of assessing and certifying employees. Let's talk a little bit about 3 specific solutions that we developed, and I'll show a couple of examples here shortly. One solution, which is used a lot in the energy sector, is the virtual trainer. And this is something that helps provide fast knowledge transfer. It allows you to have a trainee and a trainer in remote locations using low-cost equipment like the Vive, for instance, and administer and track a training in a very, very cost-efficient way. And I'll come back and show a little video here in a few minutes on this. Second one is what we call AR Assist, and this is allowing technicians in the field to get information in real time, and it can be fueled by both artificial intelligence and IoT. And here I have an example. This one is using IoT, not artificial intelligence, but we have others that do. This is our partner, Sumtobel, which is an integrated lighting company. I'm going to mute that for a second. But it can be anything. This could be a petroleum plant or refinery, go out in the field. But you see the technician here is aiming the AR device, a tablet in this case, could be wearable glasses, to the lighting fixture, and is getting real-time information about energy consumption, temperature, other information, And this is, each of these lights has an IoT connection, and all this data is being pulled from the cloud in real time. You can even control the light here from the AR interface. And besides for maintenance, which we saw there recently, we can also use this for commissioning, for instance, identify groups and systems as we commission them. This here shows a wearable device which can be used instead. It's a little hard to show in the video, that's where we showed the tablet. And this shows a little bit of the IoT infrastructure behind there. So air assist is not something that is going to happen in the future. It's happening now. It's important to get engaged to really take the biggest benefit of this over the coming years. Last but not least, we have what we call Creator AVR, which is the creation tool where you can import your own data and you can create training scenarios. There's no doubt that certain training scenarios are so complex, you're going to need experts to create them, programmers, artists, and so forth. But Creator AVR allows an instructor, a technician, to build simple training scenarios and distribute within their network or within their group of employees and so forth. It's used both in education and industry. Some of the key benefits: efficiency, productivity, value add. Focus on your development, build IP and benefits around this. It can also be customized and branded. We do complete white label solutions. As I mentioned initially, we're very agnostic when it comes to both hardware and software. But that's really a good thing because there's so many hardware devices out there, so it's almost impossible for a non-expert to pick the right one for certain scenarios. So that's something we help out with. Fast implementation using this platform where you have, everything is built from an infrastructure standpoint. You can, deploy something, within a few weeks for a simple training application. Okay, let's move on a little bit and talk about why now. As I've mentioned a few times, there's a couple of macro trends that are really important to keep in mind. AVR, Augmented and Virtual Reality, is our focus, but we're touching these other technologies like Internet of Things, like we saw in the example with the Sumtobel Group, Tridonic, cloud computing. Everything we deliver, for the most part today, is done via the cloud, or it could be a local network as well. And then we have AI, which we've been working with over the last year or so. And it has a number of benefits. One, it can help cut down application development by many factors for certain applications. For instance, reusing an existing maintenance manual to build applications and perhaps automate a big part of the process using AI. It can also be used to make more adaptive learning, adaptive training. So these trends are really influencing what we see in the landscape. Let's talk a little bit about analysts and what they are saying. I don't think any analyst is 100% right. We don't favor one over the other, but picked a few here to talk a little bit about. This one was interesting, from last fall by Gartner, and they were looking specifically at HMDs for augmented and virtual reality. And one of the conclusions from them was that by 2020, 50% of the top 50,000 companies in the world will have executed augmented and virtual reality projects. And we see this, there's no doubt about it, that the adoption, acceleration of engagement is happening very, very quickly. And also interesting is that HMD penetration rates in business adoption will exceed consumer adoption, which has been a little lackluster. And this will happen over the next 2 years. We totally wholeheartedly agree with that conclusion. Here's another one from Goldman Sachs. There's a nice video here. You can look it up online or we can share it with you. I'll skip that in the interest of time, but one of their conclusions is 85% of VR growth will come from non-gaming sources. Early on in the most recent VR revolution, at least, a lot of the HMD's development was driven from gaming. Now we're really taking advantage of it from an enterprise standpoint. Goldman Sachs also looked at the distribution between the hardware and software. And of course, with software, you have applications as well. And the interesting thing is that about half of the market by 2025, or around, I think it's close to 45 billion, will be around software, which is interesting. There's also some studies that show now that AR is having a much faster adoption than originally expected. And this study from Markets and Markets shows an enormous growth in AR by 2022, a CAGR of over 75%. But also interesting, already in 2016, measuring this larger than the VR market. So again, thinking about AR assist, knowledge injection, it's really important to keep an eye on AR. The beauty is that with our AVR platform, you can move seamlessly from one to the other publishing format. And if you're interested in trying this out, you can go to EON Creator AVR on the App Store or Google Play or iTunes and download, and you can try this for yourself with a Google Cardboard or a little printed marker. Why should you consider EON Reality? As I mentioned, we're first and foremost a software platform company, and we built up a lot of infrastructure there, as we've talked about, AVR platform, different tools, everything from easy to use to professional. But one thing we also do is that we work very closely with our hardware suppliers, hardware partners, and we make it easy to integrate your solution with a variety of hardware. We know that not one shoe is going to fit all, and we support a little bit over 30 different publishing formats from phone to dome today. So there are many high-end systems and many simple kind of consumer-based systems, and we make it easy to move along that range. And then we work with applications. Most of the EON employees today are involved in either managing application development, creating content for application developing, or converting content, or programming. And of course, there are a subset of skills there, and that is really, really important. So here's a little bit depiction of the phone to dome, showing kind of a snapshot of different types of systems. If you haven't had a chance to see this, feel free again to reach out to our marketing team, and we can schedule a visit to one of our global locations. So over the last many years, we focused a lot on the customer experience, and I think between 1999 and 2012 we worked with an enormous amount of enterprise, academic, and government customers. We've done well over 1,000 projects in AR and VR by that point, and I don't think within this focus there's no one that even comes close. We started developing the AVR platform in 2013, so this is a relatively new platform, which is good because it's built on all the modern technology. We rolled it out in a beta version in 2016, and then we had a full rollout now in 2017, which is very exciting. We're not done yet. We're still adding features and benefits and building it out, and we have a clear roadmap now for what we're doing through 2018. In terms of the IDC network that I mentioned before, we started our first IDC in Manchester, UK in 2014. It's today our largest development studio, and the vast majority of employees come through our school, which is part of the IDC. Has also developed a large amount of business, and more lately, some of our key IP comes from this office, like EON Creator AVR, that we'll look at more soon. And of course, looking forward, we're focusing on building out this enterprise platform. We've chosen to go with a SaaS model to make the barriers lower for companies of any size to get in and scale this as they build it out to all of their employees over time. One thing that I'd like to mention, this might look a little scary, but this is a reality. AR and VR is kind of like the tip of the iceberg that you see. Underneath this, you have this, devices. You have content, CAD systems, LMS systems, IoT, database system, business systems, rendering platforms. And all of this has to work in concert. And one thing that EON has done is building up this expertise over the years, where we have access to skilled employees that can cover all of these areas to make your implementation successful. This is not easy to do. We see today, sometimes game studios approaching enterprise, and it's easy to underestimate the complexity that you're dealing with. And from EON's side, we've been doing this long enough, so we're definitely ready to do this. Okay, let's go and look at some examples. I think the first thing I'd like to do is show a little bit the virtual trainer. And I have a video here that I'd like to play, at least in part. And as you see here, I'm accessing this from YouTube. So if you search for virtual trainer, you'll be able to find this easily.
Welcome to EON Reality.
So let's listen in a little bit.
Enterprise Virtual Trainer. During this demonstration, I'm going to play as the trainer, who's going to connect to one of our trainees. Prime Master Filter Cleaning Procedure. So the first thing that we can see on here is that I've got Chris's facial avatar and his hand controllers. Right now we are following him around the scene, and we're looking at his interactions. Before object, or to focus my personal camera on the selected object. Okay, Chris, what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through the procedures for changing the filter system with Prime Master. One of the things I'm able to do in instructions, depending on the object that Chris is interacting with. The door, for example, is a one-handed interaction. Chris, could you mind opening this door for me?
Sure thing.
I'm going to mute the sound there and just explain a little bit. This is obviously a training for a health and safety application in restaurant, but it could be applied to anything. Chris is in a remote location from the trainer. The trainer is joining via a standard laptop tablet, and Chris is doing everything here with an HTC Vive with a dual controller. And he's going through a filter change in this case. The virtual trainer is fully integrated with learning management systems, different data. We deployed this now in Fortune 500 companies and been able to prove a tremendous value delivering the training this way versus traditional. Saving on travel time, cost, facilities, providing the safe work environment, so forth that I mentioned. If you're interested in seeing this live, please feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to arrange a demonstration. We've already talked about knowledge injection creators. I'm gonna move this forward and talk just briefly about the IDC hubs. We've already mentioned this somewhat. So one is they're responsible, and we have well over 20, besides about our 10 different office locations, is to work with AVR platform deployments. And it's also a knowledge factory for AVR applications and services. As I mentioned, we've done this now in many locations, both in the US, overseas, Asia, Middle East, Africa, Europe, Eastern Europe, with universal success in terms of building those skills. And that's done through the AVR school. We've chosen to develop our own curriculum. We have our own teachers, so we're very, very focused on the quality of the teaching. And we're also focused on the business aspect to develop a sustainable, scalable business at each and one of the IDCs. Without this, we can't make you, our customers, successful in the long run. So this is very, very important. And so far, we've been able to do this with a very, very good growth around the world. Our goal, and this is a big goal, we have a big focus on this in our organization, is to, within the next 3 years, develop about 100 IDCs around the world. 20 of these will be hubs, or 20 of the new ones will be hubs, so bigger IDCs with about 50 satellites. And we have, besides the 20 that are up and running, 30 that are signed to date, and so about 10 of them are in the build-up stage. So a lot of work here, but this is, at the end, extremely important. We know that many of you have many, many products, many, many procedures that need to be addressed, fully take advantage of AR and VR. And to be able to scale, you have to do it this way. Let's talk a little bit about customer case studies. This is a quick snapshot. Some of these are in energy, some aerospace, but just to give you an idea. And then I'll talk a little bit specifically about a few in the energy sector. ExxonMobil has been a key partner over a number of years, and we've developed an immersive 3D training environment. I'm going to come back at the end and talk specifically about this. But we've been able to create the system that's connected in the beginning in an iCube to a console simulator, allowing for much more flexible deployment of training scenarios. This has more lately also been ported to HMDs and other devices. Let me show you one example here from BP. This is an operator training essentials application. And I'm going to run this off my desktop. I can't share an iCube or an HMD, so I'll do it that way. So here we have a small plant. The physical plant is actually in Trinidad Tobago. It's a training plant, and we basically help BP build a virtual replica to provide new operators, about 5,000 per year around the world, with easy access to training. I'm right now in the walk-around mode, and as you'll see, I have some tools. I have a measuring tape. I have a PNID, so I can look at the process view of the plant from a drawing. I have a camera, so I can take pictures and document what I'm doing. Of course, I take virtual pictures. And after I've done this walk around, I'll write a little report, turn it into my manager, so you can simulate that whole process. The next step is to go into risk assessment. And I mentioned this before. We work with safety integrated as much as we can. So in this scenario, we're actually going to work on this Schaefer unit that we see over here. And now I can see there's some other things going on in the plant. And the goal here is to make sure that nothing is going to interfere with the procedure that I'm going to do. So there's a guy doing maintenance here. There's a toolbox. There's some lights. There's a guy working up here. So I have to look at all this. All of these objects or workers are placed randomly. So when I start the simulation next time, I might have a different type of interference. Weather will be a factor here from a risk and safety standpoint, but it looks good in the forecast. Next time I run it, that might not be the case. The next step is to do an isolation procedure or lockout tagout procedure. And I'll do a few steps here so you can get an idea of what we're doing. And just like a good pilot, we'll start working off a checklist here. So the first thing I have to do is call up my friends in the control room and ask them to close this unit. And as I go through these different steps, I'll have 2 or 3 different options maybe sometimes. So I'm going to ask the control room to close this unit. The next step will be to do a visual inspection and make sure that this unit indeed is closed. And I can physically walk over using the keyboard and mouse, or I could go to the PNID and zoom in here a little bit. We'll be able to see what's going on. And then I have on this now hotspots, and if I'm familiar with this, I can go directly to the through the hotspot to the unit. So now we see here it still says open, so something went wrong, and that's how this simulation is built. Things can actually go wrong. Next time I run this, it might close right away, but it didn't, so now I have to know how to do the override procedure. And we'll do that here in a moment. And of course, I'm going to need someone to come and close this manually in the field. There was something with the from the control room to the field that didn't work properly in this case. Next step is to confirm bypass valves, and I'll use the hotspot on the PNID here again. I'm quite familiar with this application, so I know that this is one of the bypass valves. And I have to make sure they're closed and get a little check mark. This one is not related, so I'm not worried about that one. That's something else. So we need to make sure that one's closed. Next step is to go into my toolbox, and here you can see all the tools I'm going to use to do this whole procedure. I'm not going to do all the steps, it will take too long, but I'll do one tool procedure here, which is the lockout tagout. And voila. We have done that. So with that, I'm going to leave this procedure, but it gives you an idea of a one application and case study. Of course, we use VR, AR devices when we deliver this, but it was easy to show off the desktop, just to give you an idea. With Saudi Aramco, we developed a VR training system for seismologists and technicians. We've done things like vertical seismic profile acquisition simulator based on a Baker Hughes logging truck. We've been able to do that completely virtual. We developed an entire frac job site with over 200 pieces of large equipment that you can kind of master plan as you train and lay out the whole frac job site. So lots of interesting things there. PetroSkills, we've done a virtual field trip. So this is more the visualization aspect. Here it was a rock outcrop. More recently, we're also developing safety training applications based on HCC Vive for common issues like, for instance, H2S safety in a gas plant. We've also done quite a bit of work in nuclear and utilities with Kepco in South Korea. We delivered a familiarization trainer that allowed all employees to very quickly familiarize themselves with the entire plant and be able to do everything, including going into the containment building and see a fuel rod replacement, for instance, which you could never do in real life, of course. And by doing this in a completely virtual way, you can have an enormous cost reduction in training. LiDAR-based visualization. This is from RasGas. We participated in a project in the Middle East, primarily in United Arab Emirates, where we captured around 15 famous reference outcrops. And it's used for training future geologists, and it's also turned out to be a little bit of a cultural heritage project, as a lot of these locations are being encroached by human activity, urban development, and may not exist for many more years. And this was actually the launch from the IPTC, International Petroleum Technology Congress in Doha, Qatar. And here we used an iCube system to share these wonderful outcrops. We also work a lot with vocational education, so I don't want to forget that. This is from ITE in Singapore. And during the unveiling of their iCubes training system, we had the pleasure of having the Prime Minister and Education Minister join us. And I'm going to show a little video here. We've since developed a lot of applications with ITE around marine and offshore. And for instance, with lifting operations, which we'll see here, where you can, in an iCube or VR environment, change weather conditions, go to different training scenarios, set up different issues as you go through a lift. And for those of you who work on rigs, you know that lifts is still the most common cause to injury. So you can't do this enough. We also, as you go through this, we've introduced different issues there, so you can kind of see that one of the straps is not hooked properly. That was addressed. There is a belt that's twisted. It's going to be addressed here in a second. So you really have to pay attention and notice all of these different issues. If we hadn't noticed those issues, this pipe that we lifted here would actually fall down. And I can tell you, when you see that in the iCube and with the sound, it brings a different level of training. And then, of course, assessment. So here we saw the trainee had about 70 score out of 100, and you got that feedback immediately. I promise we'll talk a little bit about the ExxonMobil training simulator. And we had the pleasure a few years back to have Rex Tillerson, then Exxon Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, visit us and review this at the ExxonMobil Research Center in Qatar. 2015, we signed an agreement to commercialize this. We started the work in 2008, so this was a long, in 2008, the first ones we started this. And the goal was to create a training system where you could, in the long run, accelerate training, accelerate the time to achieve mastery, and provide a safe training work environment as you did this. And a little bit of the background was to connect the console operator with the field operator more. They often train separately, and team training is typically not offered. Here's a little video that shows the initial use case using an iCube.
This system is great because you could basically train on a specific scenario, do it over and over again in a safe and controlled environment without having to worry that you're going to actually cause an issue in the plant. This environment.
And some of the feedback that we've seen is that this helps with localization, it helps with recovery, turnaround, and so on. So there's a lot of different levels of benefits that you can achieve with this. Let's talk a little bit about future opportunities. We're almost at the end here, and then we'll open up for some questions. I think the most important one to think about is what I often refer to as a knowledge worker. This is going to be a huge market. This is primarily about AR, but VR to some extent. Contextual knowledge on the spot, integrating with different other technologies that we've talked about, like IoT, AI, and so forth. And through this, we are convinced from EON's side that we'll reach a new illuminated world. We'll be able to enhance skills and help our employees to do the advanced things that's going to be required in the future in a safe and sound way. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me for this webinar, and we'll open up for some questions. Thank you.